How are you doing, man?
Hey, my audio just connected. I didn't get to hear that first part. How's it going?
Good. How are you? You don't have to have video too if you're not in a place. I'm just happy to talk to you.
Oh, all good, all good. I'm hopping off the other meeting and Zoom always opens with the camera off. So I'm here now.
No, that's actually a wise decision. You never know. You never know.
hmm That's how I feel.
Since our last discussion, I had mentioned one of the things you shared with me about the insider aspect of OpenAI with the
hmm
rate system and how Sam Altman essentially bypassed that with AGI, and that's what got him in trouble. That's been like one of my water cooler shares with people that I really enjoyed. So thank you for that.
Of
Um,
course.
Overall, I really like chatting with you. What's new? What are you working on right now?
Uh, Honestly, I've been so heavy, less AI, more brand focused. Like, I don't know if you follow my LinkedIn at all. It's more on the, I guess, generic content side of things, but I've really been leaning into the audience and showing value behind growing companies. And
Mhm.
so I've been so busy with that. Like there's been so many things in terms of the growth of branding agency. It's actually overwhelmed right now. And then of course on the marketing agency as well, where I'm actually just basically head down, focus on operations. I've been sad, but a little removed from AI news lately. How about you?
I've been diving into all sorts of things. I do want to chat with that. I have also started working on branding as well as general presentation of my content. That is not my specialty. And I've been looking at repurposing tools to automate process flow and keep it organic and follow the Gary V methodology. I am trying to get to his level and I am going to, by God.
That's incredible. Yeah. Gary Vee crushes it.
And he does. A recent development for me that I find rather ironic, and this is going to move us slightly off topic. I have a lot of friends over the years that have told me, like, you need to check into getting diagnosed for ADHD. I thought they were full of shit. I thought they were just talking. And I
Uh-huh.
went and I took this virtual reality test.
hmm
And you understand neural processes. The way that they did it is they constructed it so that you were basically looking at a Nemo fish and a nori fish. with other fish mixed in, going in between these rocks. And then you
Mhm.
had to follow auditory cues and visual cues, switching back and forth. And then you did that for the first half. Then they flipped it and inverted the whole process. It nuked my brain. I could not cope. I could not do it. And I thought that I was basically going to have to retake the test. And with the guy after, he's like, no, it's a nightmare for people that have ADHD. They can't do it. I was like, oh, that explains a lot. And
That
I
is so funny.
I got my scores and what they call like very elevated. I scored across every single category above that. And I'm like, huh. And then I started to reflect on my life. I'm like, that makes a lot of sense. Because I don't know if I shared with you, I was a dropout. I missed most of elementary. I just couldn't
Okay.
focus. Autodidact. I had to self teach myself through my physics degree to get to where I am. And I'm just like, now that I'm actually on the medication, I am getting so much more done.
Really? That's incredible though.
Yeah, it is.
Crazy
I
to realize it this late, but good.
absolutely. I know how to live without it. Mindfulness and all these other techniques, even neurofeedback I've utilized. And now this is just night and day difference. So that's an aside. But what I want to share with you in recent developments, this is going to fascinate you. I believe I talked to you briefly about the quantum consciousness from Roger Penrose.
Hmm.
I was at a recent event, and this gentleman showed me a publication that came out a few weeks ago. In the publication, what they did is, just to reiterate, Roger Penrose postulates that the microtubules in our neurons act as a conduit for quantum interaction, and that produces consciousness. Very high level. Well, what they did is they took these rats that they were going to undergo anesthetics, and they put the anesthetic on a control group, and then they put a microtubule stabilizer in the test group, and then administered the anesthetic. And what they found is the group with the microtubule stabilization stayed conscious for a longer period of time.
Crazy.
It is. And I was like, okay, this is validation for the research. This can't be explained by the reductionist approach to our neurobiology, not at all. And
Yeah.
that is where I've kind of been spinning off, thinking what I'm going to do next with that. But that's the biggest thing I'd say. Have you been playing, by the way, with the new preview? Have you even had a chance to touch it? The new OpenAI 01 or O one?
Just a bit. I know my team's been playing with it more than I have, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
How
Dude,
about you?
it's amazing. So I'm not a coder, and I have all this data that I've compiled for different tests and things, self-directed studies. And I
Hmm.
compiled it and I had it basically create an HTML file that would allow people to go through this process of testing their own brain to identify
Hmm.
their morphology from just a questionnaire. So that was really fun. But that's the biggest thing I've been doing and looking at other tools for repurposing content. And I found a new one that you might like. Have you heard of GenSpark AI?
Gen Spark. I feel like it rings a bell. Tell me about it.
Think Perplexity, but free.
Very cool. I I think well, before I actually talk on that, I will also mention one that's been a lot of fun for me. Again, I don't think my audience cares to watch my long form tutorials as much, but is V0 builds a lot of front end UI UX that's actually functionable. So many of them before, like not but a few months ago, you were limited to the idea of basically building like static images and seeing if you could submit that to other AIs and say, hey, could you turn this into like functional HTML or write this in React or React Native, whatever it may be that you were trying to deploy it to. And then over the last few months, I think V0 or VO, whatever they call themselves, has come into play where they're actually making functionable UI UX front ends. And so if you use that alongside Cursor, which is an application that just came out, it's basically like an IDE, but think AI embedded in all of it. And so that you can actually have Cursor with the right prompts, basically build out all the pages you have, all the initializations, set up the actual project environment, and write functionable code. And so when you pair the two, you basically have a functioning UI UX system, and then you have Cursor to build the entire backend actually functioning. So I've been testing and playing around with it just a bit in my free time, and if you set up your own like database and authorization and everything, you can actually make like a very simple functioning application without actually writing any of the code, which is pretty crazy.
What would you argue would be the Like, because there's going to be people looking at this. What's the baseline knowledge people need to have to be able to start doing this and working with those two tools in tandem?
I would say the only thing you actually need to know is like npm install. Like you need to know what to set up. As funny as it sounds, like most people just don't know how to set up a basic coding environment. Like you'll still need to import a lot of the libraries and understand how to set up a project. But like my test was more so, could I do this without writing a line of code? And I essentially did. Like besides small tweaks, which I think if you have any problems, I would recommend, if you don't know code, then going back with each section to something like Claude or even ChatGPT now and saying, hey, could you review what's wrong with it? But beyond that, you can actually get away with some simple applications without writing any code. That's really the minimum you need. Is just knowing what libraries need to be in place to make it actually launch the first time. Then you're good to go. It's crazy.
Well, I'm going to add that to my to-do list then.
Yeah.
I both know that the gap is going to disappear eventually, but if we have context and we have essentially the physics, as I like to look at it, you're going to be able to do a lot more.
Mm-hmm. And I think we're in the first time where, and I say this a lot, where I'm like, there's still a pretty large gap between what people think AI like can do for them with ease and what it actually, like the actual background knowledge you need to step in and truly harness the potential of AI. Like I do feel there's a knowledge gap that's quickly closing, but still exists, that like we have so many companies we speak to that they don't understand why, the basic plug and play applications that are out there and they can't submit it to ChatGPT and it can't run their company. Is there's still quite a bit of training and optimization and prompt engineering and multi-chain stepping that goes into making it truly a high performing agent for a company. But as it continues to kind of remove itself, I think the democratization of just efficiency and like access to these things will continue to come, where there's plenty of people with incredible ideas that have never until now been able to even think of the idea of affording, hey, I might be able to launch my own app behind it. And so, in that regard, I think there's a lot of room for just baseline innovation that was previously inaccessible to a lot of people, which is exciting. But I still think we're in an age where the gap does exist, that once you have that MVP validated, you probably still need a team to do the actual development that makes it truly a complex application. But I think that's where we're at.
No, I like that. I look at it in a similar fashion if we pivot over to legal. You can
Mm-hmm.
have documents now prepared that would normally be done by a paralegal. You can even vet them against case law, and then you
Yeah.
submit a lawyer for final approval. And that way
Mm-hmm.
you save substantial amount of money. And you also have a very concrete document because, as you know, a lot of this, just like with coding, it's boilerplate. There are
Yeah.
different templates and snippets that's essentially what a programmer does, if I understand it correctly. A lot of times, once you have the base framework, you retool other people's code a lot of the time.
Absolutely. Plenty of the time. Yeah, for sure. And I agree that that is the side that I think, like in the next 2 to 5 years, will have the biggest impact. Like what you mentioned is there's a lot of roles that are inefficient because humans are forced to do it, where like you could just train paralegals to be a higher thinking member of the team
Yes.
and remove them from the day to day where they have to spend their hours diving through databases and still doing a worse job than AI could in under 2 minutes, right? And then they can actually focus on what the higher levels at, the higher level roles at law firms typically don't actually have the time to do, but have to, which is diving in and doing the further analysis now that it's been actually, fetched and it's been found. And now they have to break it down. And those things, like across dozens, if not thousands of industries at this point, like can be automated and leave room for a lot of those higher level tasks that probably just are underdone because of a lack of team like awareness or availability at the very least.
I would say resource availability and cost constraints are the primary concern for most litigation.
Yeah.
Um, I base that off of watching too much Suits.
That helps for sure. That's good context. Yeah.
It is because you see that they've got the teams to do the background. They've got Mike, who's got this quasi photographic memory that
Yeah.
he can do. I'm like, isn't that AI now, essentially? Go in and
Yeah.
scour databases. I'm like, isn't this everyone now?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but that all being said, oh, I know you're down in the ops of everything, but you've got to. I'm trying to think of where to go because I want to know more about your brain and how you see things because you understand branding, you understand communications in a way that I don't.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Well, no, it's obvious in the way that you carry yourself, and I would say more importantly in the way that you've structured your websites. They're minimalistic and they focus on the Pareto principle. You get across what you want to with minimal utilization, which is key, right?
Absolutely.
And I think that's something, for instance, you just touched on earlier when you talked about your tutorials. People don't watch those as much. And I think a lot of that has to do with the diminishing attention span from oversaturation of reels. And that actually goes back to, so one of my dear friends, he is a performance psychologist. He has his PhD in performance psychology, and he's currently doing his PhD in clinical work. And he is one of the only certified clinical practitioners of mindfulness. Just so you know, that's only 5% of the total mindfulness like instructive community. And his
Wow.
primary focus is on attention. So much so that he was working with his girlfriend who's over cybersecurity and crypto security at Fidelity. And one of the biggest concerns they have right now, this has been trickling down according to different agencies, including the FBI, is North Korea and China have been utilizing their efforts to get people inside of our infrastructure in web security and simultaneously utilizing AI to manipulate the thinking of American citizens. And one of their biggest concerns here now is how do we redirect attention to cause people to be able to be more aware of the things that are happening around them and how their attention's being grabbed by different things. So she ended up training like 16,000 people on some of his methods. And I'm like,
Wow.
that's an interesting development to be aware of, even though you and I can easily recognize that's happening. Like,
Yeah.
we've been doing that for a lot longer than now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like you can approach it from a number of industries at this point, where coming from like being in technology and a lot of the denser spaces where I'm still introduced to publications, presentations, developing research and things like that. And then in the same days for someone like me, shifting back over to marketing psychology and understanding how can we capture and understanding our hooks and our first second of our video is all we really get to keep someone for even 5 seconds. It's kind of funny to see the shift. I've been, I think, marketing myself pretty aggressively since maybe 2018, 2019 or so is probably when I personally dove into it the heaviest. And like I've seen a decline even in those years of, hey, we only have 5 seconds to catch attention. Hey, it's 2022. We only have 3 seconds to catch attention. Hey, it's 2024. If we don't get them in the first second of this hook, we probably lost them. And so I say all that to say, I think in our current time, I talk a lot in my personal content as well about the meaning and value of deep work and mindfulness, just because I think focus has become one of our largest commodities, something that most people lack. And I have to work very hard myself because I am probably on the verge of having ADHD as well, of removing just about everything in my environment except what I need to focus on, because I feel that oftentimes the amount of things pushed onto you will genuinely steal from you. Not to mention, if you look at research and publications behind what it does to your mental state in terms of dopamine, the way you express chemicals, I can undoubtedly agree with the statements you shared because I think it's a big problem, and I think if not checked correctly, it can be detrimental to growth and progress. I couldn't imagine where I'd be if I wasn't able to allocate some time of each day to deep focus and deep work.
I like that. And related to that, I think there's almost an underpinning in society where people are basically that they feel they must
Right.
respond, they must do, they must act. And you can readdress that feeling. How do I want to put it? Reframe it to like, this
Mm-hmm.
feeling doesn't mean I must act. It means I must stop
Right.
and slow down. And once you start to reframe it, then you can regain some of that. I will admit openly that that's a huge problem of mine. So many ideas and nothing getting done.
Right.
Happening
I'm there plenty of the time.
But now I'm finding that I'm able to do that a lot better. And I understand the not damage. Well, I understand the wasted time with cognitive switching, that we're
Mm-hmm.
not really multitaskers. And every time we switch frameworks, it takes a much higher energy toll than staying on the given framework you're working with.
Yeah.
So since I've got you on the topic and I'm looking to learn a lot more myself, what are some of the biggest lessons you've learned in marketing since 2018?
Since 2018, let's see. I would say one of the biggest trends that, I've had to allocate a lot of my own personal focus to was when I first started, and I think this was happening long before I stepped into marketing, but I'll say a trend over the last few decades has been there was always like a lack of abundance in ideas getting reached to actually market, for example. And that's why I mentioned the AI side of things, that now we're in a state where MVPs and product launches have kind of never been more accessible. Someone can genuinely write alongside a well-trained AI. They could write a book in a couple days. People can launch products because it's never been easier. It's never been easier to launch websites or applications or have teams, in different countries, like actually launch functioning apps in under a month. So the shift went from there's a lack of ideas in abundance to now there was a lack of actually launches. Then that was taken care of. And now it's never been more democratized to launch something. And I think now, because things have become so accessible, the biggest shift that I've seen in marketing and business growth is we are in an age where distribution has become the bottleneck. People don't know how to reach people meaningfully and actually cultivate audiences in a sea of people blasting content every day. We're in an age where over 50% of what's on the internet and Google's search engine is AI generated. We have billions of pieces of content going out every month. It's massive. And if you don't understand how to genuinely cultivate audience, reach people meaningfully, and cut through the noise consistently, it's now not a problem of whether or not you can make the product. It's can you distribute it and find the right people to use it.
That's a huge lesson that I hope, well, I'm definitely going to capture it in the newsletter because that's big. And going, like, I know very little about this process. So when I step into this, just understand I'm a wee lad.
Understood.
But I look at what Gary Vee does, and speaking from the concept of performance psychology,
Mm-hmm.
what I've studied there, he makes a lot of sense. Like, you do want to produce good, genuine content, but the more you practice and the more you get it out there, the more you're going to learn at a much more rapid pace. The
Yeah.
IDEO methodology, right? Rapid prototyping.
Mm-hmm.
We all learned it back in grade school, so to speak. And that is one of the key aspects that we can now do that you're talking to. And I think that that's also going to lend itself to what we're seeing in the exponential growth that's
Mm-hmm.
happening probably from a minority, I would argue. But that minority now has obtained the ability to be exponentially more productive. And
Yeah.
as my friend Roy would put it, like, we're dealing now with these AI systems that can't keep up with how fast we can process, because now we're
Right.
realizing what we can do, and then we're running into walls, like our hands don't type fast enough, or it doesn't conceptualize what we're saying fast enough. And if we could just throw what we're thinking into it, we'd achieve a lot faster development, which I want a neural lace pretty bad once those become useful and applicable.
Yeah. No, I agree with that statement. I think that's a great point as well, is that we've never had the opportunity to kind of think and expand as quickly as we do now. But now some of the limitations may become genuinely physical, that we actually can't iterate fast enough ourselves. But I agree with your point on the Gary Vee aspect as well. I think he's a great example of an innovator who builds in public, as like he's been there since the internet started and he's had a lot of fun with it. And every single day he's putting it out there. And he's found an incredible balance between quality versus quantity, for sure. Like, he's definitely someone who leans a little bit on the quantity side, but always drops massive value. And he's definitely an example of someone who shows that a lot of the biggest successes, especially in things like this where we're building in public and reaching audiences, is typically stacked on a massive pile of failures. And that's something that helps us cultivate the experience much faster than any sort of theoretical lesson would give us, that we have to get out there, we have to practice in front of people. And I've said in a number of my, pieces of content that I've never been a fan of the idea of like fake it till you make it, like just come out of the gate with no background or anything like that, because I think there's so much value in building in public, especially in today's world. The amount of value you can get from just doing things in public and cultivating audience and speaking with people is
Yeah.
just immeasurable in comparison to what it can do for the things, your future and the ideas you have down the line.
And I think that we're related to that too. And I hate it because everyone oversells themselves. It
Right.
it automatically produces distrust, and you look for the incongruencies, where they're like,
Hmm.
I'm a badass, I'm this expert, and I do all these things. But then you look at their background, you're like, you're a life coach. Why?
Yeah, exactly.
It's like my friend says, he's like, when people come to meet with him for performance work, he's like, look, if you want someone cheaper, you can go down the street and get a mom that just sent off her last kid to junior high. You want to change, you can work with me.
Yeah.
He's very good at what he does. Um, he was actually, he's shared a lot of new things with me lately. But one thing I wanted to actually pick your brain on, this was postulated to me the other day by the dean of an MBA school. And he said he has taught for years. He's taught at Berkeley, he's taught at other universities the same course on problem solving. And it was one of the best courses I ever did in my graduate work. But what he said is, and I think that he might be, well, I'm not going to give any context. I'm just going to ask your opinion. How do we measure critical thinking and the improvement of critical thinking with a metric? Because if we can't measure it, he says we can't improve it.
Mm, that is a tough one. I would definitely have to give it some more thought. Um, and this is kind of a problem where, so many people speak on a lot of tests that try and standardize ideas like this, like what is your actual mental function? What's your capacity? And then it gets mismanaged because I feel like we're still in a state where some tests aren't well fitted to certain people. So it's not like an easy borderline where you give something standard and everyone's going to get the same performance. I'd be very curious to hear what your thoughts are because off the top of my head, I don't have a good response.
No, you're fine. I've also had time to meditate on it because it bothered me. And I went back to what Elon Musk always says, automate last. And few people check the premises of their initial argument.
Mm-hmm.
And what I would say to you, whether you agree with it or not, Ayn Rand was an interesting philosopher because she said, always, if your conclusions are false, there's something wrong with your premises, which is basic logic.
Mm-hmm.
And related to that, what I argue is that his premise was wrong because he's looking at a way to measure critical thinking and he's looking at this effect. But what you want to be looking at is the root. And in my opinion, the root is directly related to a person's self, how do I want to put it? I'm looking for the right word, but it's basically how you orient with yourself versus reality. If you're self assured in your own opinions and ideas, you're going to be testing things differently than if you are outsourcing for an external authority to develop your ideas and beliefs. Because if you
Right.
don't have a foundation in yourself, those structures have nothing to bind to. So you can go infinitum in all these different directions and never come to any actual conclusion because there's no reference point.
Right.
And therefore, my argument is, well, if you want to develop a critical thinker, develop somebody who is authentically self-confident and they're willing to constantly challenge reality with their authentic response because they're going to learn just by happenstance. And if they're confident, they will trust that they can learn and they can grow and they can figure things out. And then critical thinking becomes a natural due process in the development of the individual. At least that's my opinion of it. Um, I asked a really successful young lady who I ran into, to give you context. Her father was forcing her to take physics classes at college when she was 7.
Okay. It's
And
early.
I asked her the same question because we were at this gala and she's like, how do you know if you're critically thinking? She's like, continuation. She immediately responded, continuation is the definition of critical thought, that it's a constant process of development. And I would have to agree, there is no end point. And as I've grown over the years, and I can sure that you've been the same way, comparing who you were 2 years ago, even to who you are now, it's probably fundamentally different.
Yeah.
And your reasoning is different. And then for me, at least, I forget where I started. So I lose relatability to others.
Right. I can
And
do that too. Trust me.
I like what, again, to quote Elon, what he says is like, when you have this idea in your mind, this is the rule he follows, break it down into as few syllables as possible, and then speak, and then hope.
I think I think that statement aligns. I've always joked ever since I took physical chemistry, like literally in my undergrad. I would think through things, and I guess this at the heart of it is basically critical thinking of how you approach any problem. And something I always live by is like breaking things down fundamentally to think through them. I always say like even if I don't remember anything from my biochemistry and like mathematics classes, which I probably don't at this point, it's a little fuzzy. I do remember how it fundamentally taught me how to think through a lot of the problems that I faced in life. And the same was with programming, where genuinely by learning the logic of some of these ideas and some of these lessons, like you think through everything else that you experience in life more similarly to some of these ideas. And so one of the funniest ones was from my physical chemistry professor. And she said, it's always funny to think about complex problems like, what is the momentum of this cow moving on a field? Because by the time you're done breaking it down, it's what does this perfectly fitted sphere look like on this infinitesimally long plane? And then we'll take it from there. And like, it's always starting from the most simple ideas of how do you think through something and build them back up. And that's always like an idea I've thought of for critical thinking. And it kind of aligns well with what you mentioned on Elon's. It's like break it down to its simplest form, let that be thought through, and then start to add in the other parts and think of things in fundamental objects isolated from one another.
I think you literally just defined critical thinking. Break it down into its simplest components, address the simplest components, how they relate to each other. And I would say, like, related to that, and I believe being implied, is that look at the components. Are they necessary? Don't assume they're necessary. That is the biggest flaw.
Yeah.
But so you've learned a lot about branding and development. I've got a question for you.
Okay.
What for you has been the most important lesson of your life?
My life, I think so. I've jumped around quite a bit in degrees. I've been very unconventional in my path. And so, for super quick context, I know you already know this, but for the people listening, like I come from, as I mentioned, biochemistry and mathematics was my initial bachelor's degree. But after that, I did a lot of self-taught programming, did boot camps, looked into machine learning, did AI. I've always been an obsessive person, so I'm always hunting for 1,000 and then 10,000 hours and just about anything I can do. And I'll stay up extremely late or wake up extremely early to get those hours in and grow. And from there, I worked with stem cell extraction in unison to when I was learning. That's where I was making money just to pay the bills. And I then went for my master's at Columbia, where I did chemical engineering and data science. I did research in an AI lab, and I was running a marketing agency. So like I've jumped around quite a bit. I've done so. I've jumped to branding. And I think the biggest thing that I found was that there's two, I guess, Japanese terms that really resonate the most that kind of encapsulate it. One is, I believe it's pronounced ikigai, of finding purpose in what you do to make impact and finding ways to actually grow while doing something you don't hate at the very least. But alongside that, which aligns well with what you said a couple minutes ago, is Kaizen, which is something that is probably my favorite term to date. And it's always been that really no matter what I'm doing, I think I've become a person who fears stagnancy above all else. I love the idea of growing. I love the idea of learning. And I think that's really what's brought me to all these different industries. And so the lesson for me has undoubtedly been find ways to continue growing without fearing the idea of shifting or pivoting and looking at it as if I'm starting over, because I think we never start from zero twice. And so despite the fact that I've changed industries so many times, I think it's actually worked to an advantage that I have so much diversity under my belt. I have an idea and all these unconventional ways of thinking in these different industries that it's let me feel like no matter what I'm doing, I am going to increase even by 0.1% each day and truly progress towards the goals that I've set for myself.
I would say that I completely agree. And maybe that's why we get along, is similar backgrounds. I first major was philosophy. Second major was education. Third major was mechanical engineering. Fourth major was programming. Then finally I settled on applied physics, engineering design, military science, and mathematics. And from there, I graduated. My first job was in nukes. My second job was in semiconductor. By the way, holding a job and stuff, let's not even go into that. After that, I worked in civil engineering. And then I worked briefly as a software program manager, so Scrum. And then finally, I did several years in technical sales, primarily selling biological and chemical products and having to understand all the nuances there and learn sales strategy both regionally and then nationally.
Right.
And then I got my MBA during that time. I self-taught myself in neuroscience. I read hundreds of books on different types of theories. You know how it is. You just read, and you accumulate all of that knowledge, and then you have to start using it.
Yeah.
My MBA. Since then, I've owned a crypto mining farm. I've owned a crypto investment firm, and I still own the investment firm. And now I've done AI agencies and multiple other businesses on the side, including a neurofeedback and a VR company. Yeah, squirrel. But like you said, you don't start from zero. And I think that that's a huge detriment to people. I run into people like I'm starting over and no one wants to hear, no, you're not. But I'm like, you're not. You're framing it wrong. If you realize that all of your skills have equal application, all these other industries, you just have to retool the verbiage. You have the exact same skill sets.
Agreed. And you think through it differently. I mean, there's studies behind it that a lot of the most successful people in the entire world in our history have been in many ways generalists. And they found things to, of course, specialize in. For some of them that, were the progressors of research, for example, where they did become a massive expert in one topic. But many of them have approached this from the generalist mindset, where oftentimes you can't bridge and find the gaps in so many areas unless you have the context of experiences across different verticals. Otherwise, you'll think in line with everyone else who's exclusively been in one place. So in many ways, I look at it as an advantage. I've come to many industries knowing a lot more about other things and how to bring those ideas and topics and lessons to this one specific use case each time.
Absolutely. And you find probably at this point, similar to what I experienced, what is now common sense to you, you point things out. People are completely oblivious that was even possible. And they look at you like, how? And a lot of times I feel like it can be somewhat unintentionally alienating because people don't want to feel stupid.
Right.
And you don't mean it that way. You just are being yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think one thing that we can definitely both resonate on, hearing that you were also in like sales, is coming to like the world of tech with an idea of like marketing psychology and sales is like a superpower that nobody wants to hear. Like it's an idea that having an idea of the experience you have in technology and knowing what it actually means in terms of how it'll impact people across the world, how it'll sit psychologically, how you'll actually sell these things, what parts are most important based on interactions with audiences is like one of the funniest shifts I've ever had in my life because, well, one, I had to learn sales the hard way when I was launching my companies, but two, just seeing it now because we work on a number of enterprise projects and ideas. And oftentimes we find ourselves asking like, did you get validation behind this? Like, do you have an audience who wants to use this? Like, this probably isn't a feature that anyone will care about. Like, I think you've made your own problem and solution, like these types of ideas where people just don't even think, or like, practices like price anchoring and basic things that have become basic to us. But in many cases, a lot of the people that we work with are like, I have no idea what the hell you're talking about.
No, you're absolutely right. And related on that, for me, the big takeaway was I got out in engineering and I saw how I was being treated as an engineer because the sales guys drive the whole business. I'm like, I want to be the flyboy. I don't want to be over here.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I understand both areas now. And that means I'm like, okay, how is what I'm about to do going to piss off operations? And how is it going to piss off the people that operations is going to say, get it done?
Yeah, absolutely.
But at the same time, you get away with murder because if you're in the sales aspect, you're driving the company's life force. And that's why salespeople get paid so much more. Oh, you little craphead. Sorry. I have to keep stuff from him.
All good.
And that's the big takeaway that I got, was being able to see, as you have too, working in industry, then running your own business. You have to learn how all the different pieces connect together. And the employee mindset doesn't lend itself well to that comprehension. People think 9 to 5, they think work-life balance. I'm like, you do need some form of balance, but it's not cut and dry.
Not at all. It has not been for me, at least. And I was actually just speaking to someone about that yesterday on an event I was presenting for, and they asked me a similar question of, what is work-life balance for you as someone who has jumped between ventures, gotten degrees in between them, and what does that look like? And I assume you may be in this similar boat, but I say, like, I don't think there's a real place for work-life balance. I think more so I look for the idea of work-life harmony, which is something I've heard from Simon Sinek, of the idea that, like, you find balance based on the place you're in your life. And so, for examples, there are, months or multiple month spans where I will basically do nothing but work.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in other cases, there are times when I may have genuinely an entire week that I just take off because it's so low and I have that balance of personal time almost exclusively. But the idea that I could have instead approached that where I only worked maybe 4 to 6 hours a day and then took off the same amount at night every time and did that every single day rigidly is impossible to even imagine. I also often mention that there's so many examples of one of the most important parts of entrepreneurship often being timing, like setting yourself up and being consistently where you need to be just to basically make yourself get lucky. There is a role of timing alongside hard work and dedication and innovation and everything else. And there's cases where you can't have work-life balance if you expect to be one of the first people to the party in some of these industries, especially in spaces like Web3 and AI and what we're talking about. It's far too quick in terms of how fast the industry is developed that sitting on an idea and having a work-life balance for 3 months when an idea needs to be launched within the next week, or you might be, fifth to the party, it just can't exist. Like, you absolutely have to get that work done and it has to be done now. Otherwise, you may never see it come to light again. So that's why I say work-life harmony has become a better balance for me. I know there will be sprints where I put everything into work, and I know there will also be times where I might take an entire week off.
Exactly. No, I'm in this exact same boat as you. And I think about it, I'm like, well, it more matches what we are anyways,
Right.
because we didn't do that historically. You had to hunt for periods of time to gather.
Right.
You just had to accomplish, and then you'd move on to whatever was next.
Mm-hmm.
There's something I was going to say, but I always watch him. He distracts me, and I wish my wife was home so she'd be with him. He is a terror. Let's put it that way. He will destroy anything and everything he can and make a mess. But
well, at least he looks cute doing it.
he is really cute. Not part of the problem. He's working boxes right now. But no, to stay on track here though, and think about this, because I did lose my train of thought because he is distracting. There is something I wanted to introduce to you. This is going to pivot us a little bit, but talking about like Web3 and innovation. The group that I've done most of my work with that's out of Abu Dhabi, they spent several years developing something they're just releasing now, and they finally did a news publication. It was on Fox World News. It's a new type of blockchain technology, and I think I brought this up to you before. It's geometric in structure.
That's right.
It has microchains and nanochains, and they've officially publicized it. And the way that it can operate is that you need only a minimum of 4 nodes to establish security. So even at that minimum layer, it's viable. And then from there, it just expands geometrically out. And simultaneously, the way they've structured this, you have a primary ledger, and you can use the primary ledger on any operational system. So basically, you have all this stuff embedded in these micro and nano ledgers that don't necessarily need to be processed, but you can process the prime ledger, and it allows you to distribute the work over a massive hash table. Mm-hmm. So you can do all that, but I'm going to probably lose our audience there. So maybe I shouldn't talk about that.
Yeah, fine.
But so I would like to ask you, since we have talked already, has there been any change in your perception about the direction of everything that we're seeing in AI and technology as a whole? Especially, well, we should probably talk about spruce pine. That's going to be an interesting effect. But
yeah, I agree with that. I think at a top level, where we're on the topic of both AI and Web3, I think in terms of just the push for technology, Web3 felt like the first explosion since the internet, where people were forced to think that there might be something more than just the internet, like what we were used to for the last 20 years. Since we thought, or I feel like much of the market took it as this is probably it. I think when Web3 finally came out and it started having enough explosive reach, there was enough people that were forced to accept that there might be another wave of growth. Since then, I think with AI, for a lot of people who may not fully grasp it yet as well, like this is really, I like to say, this is the worst AI will ever be again. And what's crazy is that as AI gets better, it helps the actual developments of systems like AI and Web3 get better almost exponentially faster. If you look at the trends of what's capable as AI starts to hit certain benchmarks and aid in our development to reach new benchmarks that much quicker, even if the gap was 3x as large as the previous one. And so with me saying that, I think relating it all back to marketing, our ownership, who we are as people, I see a need for a lot of these, not necessarily to have regulation, but to have communication between them. And so something I've always touched on is, for example, like we are living in an age where it's never been easier to make fake content, to impersonate, to have no track record of where things exist. And I think, for example, on that one use case, like this is where Web3 should be being used, for example. Like there should be unique identification of them on the internet. You wouldn't have to worry about if this was watermarked or impersonated by AI, if everything was tracked on a blockchain network that you could see where it came from and you wouldn't have to determine, was this fake or was this real? For example, in terms of how I think it affects the industries as a whole, I do feel there's a need for a large shift in how we kind of embrace some of these technologies, where I think a lot of them are still treated as trends by too many industries rather than having some sort of process to adapt them. There's always like a select few, like we still have only a few industries globally that have truly embraced Web3, for example, when in reality, it could be one of the largest game changing parts of their back end and the way they run literal, things that companies that back majorities of countries. And despite that, it's still almost frowned upon because so much of it has been run by hype almost exclusively. And so we see fluctuations in coins and tokens, and people decide that that is the worth of an industry as Web3 as a whole, when in reality, it's really like the tip of the iceberg in terms of what it could do for infrastructures of companies that are genuinely running our world. And I think AI is kind of in a similar boat where you see most of the tons of money that's put into ad spend and marketing behind AI trends is almost exclusively in this generic conversational level or hoping it's a chatbot for a company, when in reality, I've been in AI now for approaching a decade. And I like to say I was in it before it was cool. And the use cases for AI are so much more vast than the ideas of what's being used now. I feel like it targets just the ideas of creative topics, for example, like can we take creativity away and let AI automate it? But it's really here to automate complex solutions that we couldn't reach before and help push processes that were never before doable in such a speed in companies and ideas and move things in systems this way. And so I hope within the next 5 to 10 years, there's actually a shift in how we embrace some of these new technologies to actually vet them in a more standardized way and not have, governmental parties just cast them aside or try and rule them out instead of embracing them and helping them actually grow and develop society, honestly, and make genuine impacts like what some of these technologies have the capability to do.
You hit on a lot of things that I have personal experience with. The Web3 hype. We are one of the only organizations that is truly internationally backed by assets, and those assets are entire industries of nations.
Right.
And we've developed this out to such an extent that in one instance, one of our content providers, in this context, it was a agricultural group that we utilize in Ghana. They were utilizing our overlaying currency on the blockchain to do the trades for their commodities they were producing because it was more stable than their local currency. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what you're getting at, is we're able to now develop out entire industries, track supply chain, verify people, so many more things than it's being used for. And only now are we seeing people start to move that direction. And with AI content and marketing generation, the thing that I see, I have friends trying to point me at, we have to generate this, we have to generate that, because we can do all these things synthetically. And my mind's like, if your mind is moving there, it means everyone else's is moving there. And it means we're going to have so much synthetic content that people are going to be screaming for originality, even if it sucks. But because they're going to look for authentic. And that's kind of where I'm trying to focus is how do I blend the two, making sure my content is genuine and at the same time utilizing the tools where appropriate to streamline the tasks.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like you said, the more complex problems are really where we're going to see the AI facilitating humanity. My friend's ex-wife actually uses AI in developing new drugs. And as you know, earlier this year, they discovered an entirely new antibiotic utilizing artificial intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
All huge discoveries when you consider what the implications are. What I think is going to be a very fascinating area, and your background in programming will understand this, is quantum computing fundamentally will change the way we think about computing process, and it will fundamentally change the way information is processed.
Yeah.
And I don't even know how to explain that to people because you're like, we're used to first in, first out, and that's not even how quantum necessarily works.
Quantum breaks all the rules, though.
It does. But somehow we've got to learn how to work with that environment to be able to produce results. Because if we are able to create room temperature quantum computers through some type of means, it's going to fundamentally redesign the way we do everything. But
and I'll add, like, that is one extremely large example. But I think the idea is that there's a ton of industries that have potentially equally as large impacts that could come to them that were previously thought of to be unreachable, that are now something that may be aided by AI entirely. Just things where we could, like you mentioned, the drug one is a huge one where there's already examples. I mean, you can see giant pharmaceutical companies like Moderna starting to adapt, giant partnerships with people like OpenAI already, but the potential for what we could not go through because there were too many human related topics that were the bottleneck that now AI may be able to do is the idea that, from going to finding 1 to 2 new drugs a year, you may be able to find 1 to 2 drugs a minute because AI can simply go through the data that a human could never process or bring together. And that's another just single example. But as this starts to cascade into numerous industries that have massive impacts on how we live our life, it's honestly still hard to comprehend. Like, even when it's not generalized intelligence from AI and we're specializing them on the use cases we know it should be, the reach that we potentially have in our power is, again, it's somewhat unfathomable, including quantum, which to this day, we still don't truly understand some things that happen in them. And we just have to say, well, that's quantum. But we may not always have to say that.
yeah, eventually we'll actually understand it, which will be neat. Well, we'll understand more.
Yeah, at the very least.
I'll understand more. Now, so I am going to ask you, what do you, like, I want to know your thoughts on this. What do you think that the destruction of the silica mine is going to do to innovation?
So this is something that I think, well, one, that's a problem. Like, obviously there's bottlenecks of limitations in that aspect that, like, that's going to cause its own problem. Like, if we have things that restrict us or limitations that are clearly set on our growth, then that is obviously a hurtful part. And I think that can be seen in a number of industries. Like, whenever there's limitations set, whether it's physical resources or rules and regulations, and, it's not to speak negatively, but, like, you can also see a limitation that was set was a lot of regulations in Europe, for example. And if you watch the trend of innovation, it clearly ticks down in entrepreneurship and innovation there versus other countries when they set their regulation. If the new bottleneck in regulation is now a physical resource that stops too many companies from reaching what they want, then I undoubtedly think there will be some sort of impact, and it won't be a positive one. What I will say, though, is in the optimistic spirit of what we're talking about with AI, I also am very curious to see how AI begins to impact materials technology and materials chemistry. As one of the things that I contributed a small piece of my AI research at Columbia was actually leveraging machine learning and AI to explore how we could make conformations of different, cheaper, and more accessible metals basically match that of platinum, for example, in batteries. Like, how could we make what we have more commonly match the qualities of things that we don't? And eventually, I wonder if in the near future we'll be able to come up with materials chemistry solutions that replicate that in this case as well. Can we replicate some of the most necessary materials that are our bottlenecks oftentimes for innovation, growth, and business on this planet? So those are my thoughts on both sides. The negative truth, what I think will undoubtedly impact the growth for a period of time, but also the hopefulness of what may come out of it based on some of the experiences I had done personally and what I know quite a bit of people invest maybe billions of dollars at this point into in terms of materials chemistry as a whole.
Yeah, no, I agree with you that this is going to limit certain types of innovation and simultaneously it's going to foster others.
Yeah.
I don't understand a lot about the European landscape in terms of the general regulation, but I do understand, and the people I've talked to that are business people out there, how they're kind of like an eyesore in their community. I've ran
Especially
into
technology. And not to say that necessarily all of it's wrong, but I will say that the biggest impacts are undoubtedly in data regulation and access to AI and some of these larger technologies that are helping fuel a lot of the growth of the landscape in other countries are almost entirely outruled or overregulated in those countries. And I think it's become a huge limitation to what allows businesses to reach the market the way they want to. And I think that's more so supported by me just looking at the trends based on the markets. If you kind of look at the squiggly lines on the graph, you can see things don't look great for them in comparison to some of the other countries regarding innovation. But I undoubtedly think that's where it is, like where the root of the problem may lie.
I like that. And something a friend shared with me, he's a broker. He said since the 1929 crash and we regulated the securities industry, we've seen a dramatic drop in innovation since that time, even in the United States, because that was the Industrial Revolution, right? And then you had the crash. But I would have to agree that I believe over-regulating and over paternalizing the environment limits freedom and it limits innovation. And what I think is counterintuitive to most people is they believe that regulation prevents bad players, which it does. But when you have the majority of the population not bad players, you're actually over regulating, you're stopping them. And the same can be said of all of the different taxation laws and regulations in place there. It creates this stagnation for a lot of people and the ability to move from one, in a context kind of like a caste system, from one economic status to another. And that in and of itself, people don't recognize there's a direct relationship between that and innovation. And there's a direct relationship between ideas like food security, housing security, financial stability, and innovation. Because if you can't operate in a place of calmness and well-reasoned thinking, and you're more worried about paying the bills, nothing innovative is ever going to come out in that fearful mindset.
I also think even in addition to mindset is the actual like barriers to entry that are created because of it. And so, for example, like if you look at like a psychological study almost of like what do small teams do and how do they explosively grow versus why do large teams not grow in bigger companies, it's oftentimes because the limitations are set by parameters or existing rules in the system that stop them. And so, for example, if a small company with a team of 8 has the same innovative idea as one person in a marketing department at a multi-thousand person company, the person in that marketing department cannot simply say, hey, to the 5 other people, I want to build this. What do we think? Start actually putting some P&L together and testing out what they want to launch or whatever they want to do. It's instead they have to climb departments, see if everyone gets regulated, see if there's budget, see if this happens, see if they can do this, see if they can get access to the data they need to train it or whatever it may be that they're launching. And this idea, of course, is easier understood in a company employee setting, but it really is like a a direct reflection of what kind of society and what some of these systems place, where sometimes we have to launch products for teams, or when we want to launch our own, oftentimes it takes months to even get access to some of the data we need, for example, or some of the systems we need to actually train like models or whatever it is we're working on. And it's like, that is a halt. Like that project may die because we have to wait 3 months to get approval or access to the right data we needed from a government party just to train the data or train the AI model and make it perform at the level we need. And so we don't know, we may miss out on other opportunities in the industry because we couldn't reach them quick enough in that. And that idea of like constantly being halted by regulations set, or if you're in Europe and you may not even have access or may not be allowed to use these features entirely, because it's not regulated in the country, you run into problems where it's almost impossible not to be held back in terms of innovation, because you just may not be allowed to access certain things or do it at a speed that real startups need to reach if they expect to hit that kind of escape velocity and truly grow beyond where they are.
Yeah, no, you touched on something that I identified with when we saw the GPT-3.5 come out. The way that I saw the future progressing is you're going to have these behemoths like Google, and they're powerful, but they're going to get bled by the surrounding environment, where you have smaller teams that are far more innovative, that can essentially produce much more rapidly. They can be agile and dynamic in these environments where they have a lot more authority. What I had postulated in my own mind for a hierarchy structure is small teams with high levels of autonomy and authority within these orgs, and then they're able to rapid deploy, even without all the authority constrictions, like a lot more freer constraints. And I thought that would be the best method forward. Ironically, there are groups that are doing that already, but I feel like that has to be built into the infrastructure before this ever happened, or they have to be new forming companies.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to kill this cat. I swear. He's like up behind grabbing the tassels. He's all behind my computer right now. I'm just losing my mind. But no, this is exactly where it's at. From here, though, what I would like to do is I do want us to meet up back again and talk more in the future. Give me a moment. I can't get to him. I'm just going to let it
go. Okay.
But I want to meet back up and discuss further, because I think we're going to see a lot of new developments here in the next couple of weeks. We're probably going to see Opus come out and other models come out. We're going to probably see the 3D rendering abilities of generative AI improve dramatically in the next couple of months as well. But I will say that with the constraints that have been placed upon the production of chips, it's going to require a lot more innovative techniques and algorithmic development to utilize our current infrastructure. And that also depends on the supply these places have of silica in stock to develop these chips.
Yeah.
If we learned anything from COVID, not much.
Yeah. I will say that. I will also say an interesting development I'm very curious to see how it unfolds, especially in AI, is there's quite a big trend of a massive shift in funding going towards AI projects. There's been a study, or maybe just a report, where the largest percentage of investments made into companies in the last like 6 months has been very heavily into AI. And despite that, AI is one of the lowest revenue producing parts of businesses, because so much of the largest AI companies making and taking over market industry and percentage is lacking in an actual way of generating revenue, which is a very funny shift. And I'm very curious to see how it unfolds, despite the fact that the largest percentage of our investments are going to AI companies. Almost all of them have not found a way to profitably grow their revenue. They're just building AI solutions that they feel are necessary for the world. And unfortunately, I don't think everyone can take the ChatGPT strategy in OpenAI of looking for multi-billion-dollar investments and hoping that general intelligence, once they develop it, will come up with their revenue model. So other people are going to have to think of what to do with it. And I think next time we chat, it'll be very curious to see how that continues to develop, as we're in quite an explosive entrepreneurial stage of businesses coming out of AI. And I'm very interested to see kind of where the actual revenue and profit comes from for genuine market growth because of it.
I agree. And I wonder if there's going to be a negative feedback loop from the vast majority of innovators aren't really seeing beyond the current horizon and for instance, two different technologies that I use, TurboScribe.ai, infinite transcription, Plod, this little guy right here that people have heard about. They just got outmoded by iOS 18.
Right.
And a lot of people don't realize that. And I'm like, you saw this in every iteration of AI, they're killing companies. And I'm like, well, it's the company that's not predicting this is going to come and
Yeah.
doing the forward thinking. Like, if it's here now, where's it going to be at? And how do we build something that can be agile with it? That's one aspect to it. But I almost think that that's the cart before the horse, like you're saying. We're not looking at how do we really generate and sustain long-term revenue off of our given idea.
Yeah.
And that's the big bottleneck. And OpenAI can afford it. Google can afford it. Meta can afford it. Anthropic, I don't know how long they can keep affording it for, but they're doing pretty good.
They're doing good and they're incredible, but also,
Yeah,
I don't know how long they can afford it.
to give context, I think I mentioned this before, but we'll end here. I always talk. Anthropic only has 25,000 chips that they trained their models on. And that 25,000 is 1.2 billion roughly in asset. But OpenAI has about 25 billion in asset.
Right.
Like, well, maybe you guys should just be a little bit more innovative. But then again, you see what they're actually building, and their models on the surface don't seem much different because of the intuitive nature of working with like Claude. But they are far more advanced when you actually consider what's really going into these things. Like now they have the video recognition. I'm like, no one understands how much more complicated that is than image recognition.
Yeah, exactly. One thing I'll quickly add is I do think in terms of AI exclusively that one of those bottlenecks coming is like, just like how I explained the shift in marketing going to distribution from ideation and creation, like that process of realizing what is the next bottleneck. I think the next bottleneck in terms of the actual development of AI will become processing and data. Like it's not necessarily a bottleneck of can we make more AI? It's can we get it the data we need when we're taking everything we already have? Like you can see that, for example, the different GPT models have basically just said we need more data each time. Like that was their solution. The idea is, will the innovation begin to unfold in the way of can you train higher performing models with less data or what less processing? Because that will become something that is probably going to lead to more impactful solutions in the infrastructure of other businesses than rather of can we just make more data? Although I'll say one more interesting idea that I've seen is like some companies are also stepping into the field of can we use generative AI technology to artificially create more of our data? Maybe that will be a solution as well. I don't know necessarily what the path will be, but I think a lot of the constraints we're going to run into is exactly what you're touching on, is a lot of the actual processing and compute that goes into this and the data quality that we feed it, because that those two are really the magnification of the quality of our AI more than anything else.
It is. It's one of the major issues. But I figure because in a context it's right in front of us, we got to think about what would be an alternative solution.
Right.
And one thing that I think about is basically process analysis. For instance, what I mean by that is take, for instance, self-driving cars. You take real-time data from an actual situation, and then you scope in on that to refine a subunit. I see that as a potential, but you'd still have to have sufficient access to all that data anyways, which I don't think we currently have.
Right.
So,
You need access to it. You need real-time cleaning. You need it to actually be processed correctly, as there'll be plenty of edge cases you shouldn't include in it. And the other side is, of course, access, like in general. And that ties into the problem of data privacy and finding like a middle ground where it's safe for the user to not feel like everything they're doing is being stolen from them, but it's also accessible to the systems to continue learning, which we've seen plenty of drama around and plenty of giant tech companies of stealing data for training that they may not have wanted to give away. So I am very curious of how that kind of unfolds.
I think regulating that though will be a detriment. I know that people want to protect their IP and they're really upset, but I'm like, if we had done that, we wouldn't have gotten what we got, and we never would have.
Right. I agree with you. It's like a harsh truth, but there's too many times where like the users were the training model for us, and we absolutely had to have that.
Yeah. Well, as always, it's a pleasure. Is there anything I can do for you? Any connections you want?
No, it's just great to catch up. I'm glad we got to talk. It's fun to nerd out on these things. And yeah, I just love staying in touch. Like I said, I'd be happy to hop on or just talk again whenever you want. I'm excited to see kind of how it unfolds. How are things going on your side?
Crazy. We've had a lot of developments primarily in the Abu Dhabi area where we launched Earth Exchange. We submitted that to Climate Week. That went really well. It was featured and well accepted by people like Microsoft. To give you an idea of what,
Incredible.
yeah, we were very happy about it. But when you look at the context, it's a partnership between three different countries already. We've got
Mhm.
Kenya, Indonesia, and Brazil on board for their carbon credits. And the whole idea is we use satellite scans of the entire planet to identify what is the potential carbon sequestration of every single meter of Earth.
That's insane.
It is. And I'm like sitting here just to let you know, I know what kind of technology these guys have.
Yeah.
It's not that.
Yeah, I can imagine.
It's much more. Uh,
Oh,
we can scan up to 2 miles deep.
oh my God.
So we can actually look at the literal value of that piece of land.
That's interesting.
We used this technology originally in 2019 in Ghana, and we found a roughly $3 to $4 trillion deposit of natural gas and oil. Proof, they're building out a $60 billion hub now in Ghana in the region.
If you don't mind me asking, like, how do you, is this, well, this is over, right? Like,
Yeah, I can stop recording.
I mean, it doesn't matter. I just want to know, like, it
Yeah, go
wasn't,
ahead.
um, how does, how do you guys like monetize on it? Do you get anything where you get equity stakes or like parts of the venture, or are you more so the technology fueling them to do it?
The technology, so it's actually all of that, and it's built out in several different ways. So the technology is several. The satellite technology that we use is proprietary, but it's
Mhm.
also on blockchain. And as that company grows and develops and gets contracts to scan regions, it has to kick back a royalty into the crypto that's associated with it. And people that invested in it have what are called nodes, essentially. And these nodes are multifunctional. They're NFTs that also produce crypto at a regular distribution rate and with a half life. So it's like a debenture.
It's incredible.
So that's how they built it out initially, and how they're going to continue forward is in with that model. And they built out 7 projects that way where people basically could invest micro investments, and
Mhm.
that investment could be used to grow the project. And once the project reached sustainability, it would have to kick back a given percentage of its royalties for the next 10 years on the small projects or for the next 30 plus years on the larger ones.
Amazing.
It really is a unique model that they've developed, and the technology itself too that they're deploying. So we've been operating on Binance Smart Chain, but they're
Mhm.
getting it all over to the layer one, which is fundamentally different in architecture. I don't even know how that's going to work. They've been testing all of that with, I believe, Polygon, if I'm right, or no, Polkadot. I can't remember. I mix them up. I know crypto, but I don't know Jack. Um, but they are testing it out and they're finalizing it for sending it out. But no, that's how it works is we partner with them, and the way this works operationally to see kind of the economics of it. Say you were to invest in one of these projects yourself and spend 5 or 6 grand on one of these licenses.
Mhm.
When you get that license, what they call the treasury gets a duplicate. So for
Okay.
every license the public has, there's one on the reverse side. And there's how it gets interesting. As you're dispersing and spending your crypto and the royalties are coming in, that portfolio can't be sold, and that
Mhm.
portfolio can be lent against by countries that approve lending against that kind of asset. And in this case, it's the UAE. So it's fun.
That's really cool. That is so
Yeah.
interesting.
But anyways, that's what we're doing there. And I don't know what the new project is they're about to launch. They've got another one coming out later this month when they retool and finalize everything. But it's crazy. It's been one heck of an interesting environment working in a very heavily fiduciary environment, meaning we work with real assets, real technologies, and businesses, and things you and I both understand deeply. But then you have a crypto community that is a believer of the pump and dump and get rich quick, non
Yeah.
finance. and their expectations of how things should operate is so asinine. It is
Yeah,
hard.
it is
Yeah.
hard. I was on like the much smaller, simpler e-commerce brand launch side of Web3. And even there, it's like it was a mess when we were doing it. I've honestly leaned away from it because it felt like just for the connections I could open doors with, like the work it took in Web3 to launch products without expecting people to just trash like the market economy you would launch in it was too much work. It was like it was draining because it was just treated too much like pump and dump. And so I've said to other people close to me that when I was leaving, like taking a step back from Web3, I was like, I need it to crash. So then only people who actually get Web3 will use it and we can stop with the pump and dump bullshit. So when it comes back, it can be used correctly. And I feel like we're getting there, but it sounds like you still deal with it quite a bit.
It's insane. I think you know that I don't know if you know this, but Uniswap did a third party analysis of their system, and they found out that 90, I believe, 7 or 98% of all the cryptos were fraudulent on their exchange. I'm like,
I remember seeing huge fraudulent studies. I didn't know the stats though.
they're massive, and I've encountered them even working in my space. We had a content partner that did some things, and we had to deal with them appropriately, is the way we'll put it.
It's
But
crazy.
I think that you're right. I think that's one of the interesting aspects, though, is it attracts some people that decide to be less scrupulous. I don't know why, but whatever. We'll figure
Yeah.
it out, right? People that really care about the tech are honestly so far removed from the general audience, though. That's one of the hard parts.
That's the thing. I also will say though that with technology like Web3, I think it's so advanced for the average person to understand that like it probably wasn't in a space that should have been launched as like a publicly understood thing unless it was going to be educated on. Cause like I just think there's so much to Web3 that 99% of people that have contributed to it don't fucking know what's going on. Like there's too much to it. Like you understand one token, they don't understand blockchain, they don't understand DAOs, they don't understand anything else behind it or the actual infrastructure or why it's so helpful or what NFTs play actually as a role on the blockchain. And they're just like, pretty pictures and tokens. I'm fucking investing here and I'm selling when it goes up. And that's it. And I'm like, no, it's like a groundbreaking infrastructural technology that can transform how economies function. And so that's why I'm kind of like, I wait for the crash because I just think that too many idiots have to like get out of the space that are ruining the field and then it can actually start to grow. And like, I honestly, as sad as it is, like feel like there's a degree of that has to happen in AI as well, which is sort of what I was like alluding to when you were asking questions on it, where I was like, there's too many people that don't know what it's actually good for because they didn't understand AI before LLMs were given to them. And I think we're like in a similar boat where I'm like, no, AI was like groundbreaking before an LLM that could talk to someone like a chatbot came out. Like it was something that I was dedicating my life to alongside things like Web3 and growth and marketing. And so I'm kind of like, we're in that boat again, where like there's too many people that think like, this is a chatbot. It just writes my content. It just talks to me to help write a sentence. And I'm like, no, it does so much more than that. And it's not just LLMs. It's truly what LLMs can add to the development of AI as a whole. Like, you know, the average, I could only imagine that less than 1% of people using AI in today's world understand even like what the role of deep learning and reinforcement and all these different types of actual AI model training and learning, what roles they play in the impact of what can happen in society soon. It's like, again, I just think we're in a similar boat. I think that's kind of the waves of how things get hyped versus what it actually does to add value to the world.
And you make me wonder about what is the fallout going to be from that. Well, I think we're seeing it. In this case, though, the technology is developing so fast, people are just getting outmoded.
Yeah, agreed. Like you said, I mean, some companies can be killed in overnight from an update from giants. I also think that's like, it's like this is what the same types of people that are like in crypto hype, like what they're doing in AI hype is making shitty wrappers and tools. And so it's easy for them to be replaced overnight. And like what I thought about mentioning, but I said not to was like, I think so many people don't realize like an interesting idea is like in growth marketing, something that's very underutilized, but all the largest companies that know how to use marketing do. They don't sell marketing. They sell solutions that take good marketing. And so, for example, like you can look at this is a silly example, but you can look at companies like E-Trade and some of the largest like insurance agency companies, like they're really good at marketing. So they became billion-dollar companies, not by selling their marketing. They sold the leads and the acquisitions of what they could do with their marketing to giant companies across the world. And they sold all the largest leaders. Like they're basically a marketing company though. Like they learned how to centralize all of people interested in finance or insurance or whatever it may be because they were good at marketing. And I think that will have a similar impact on AI in the sense that I think a lot of the biggest companies that come out of this oftentimes like likely won't be AI companies. It will likely be companies that actually know how to use AI more advantageously in whatever it is, the facet or industry that they want to impact. There will be some sort of plateau of just like how many people are going to try and replicate what OpenAI is doing to build a slightly better model. And where so they may just use AI in different applications or facets to make it extremely versatile in one industry and make way more money way faster than most people can because they built it. I think the simplest example probably will come out of trading, if I had to guess, like Forex trading and things. Like when someone dials that in, they're not going to be selling the AI model. They're going to be selling their solutions as like an investment brokerage because now they have AI that can do it a million times faster than them.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Guess we'll see what happens next, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. But thanks for having me on, man. I appreciate it.
Hey, thank you for your time, man. I'll see you later and have a good rest of your day.
Yeah. And if you ever want to catch up again, let me know. Like I said, you can text me or hit me up on LinkedIn. And besides that, I'm looking forward to growing alongside each other.
Yeah, I'll see you, Scott. Take care.
Have a good one.